Good morning. We have today Judge John Herron from the Court of Common Pleas, currently the Orphans Court Division.
That's right.
And so I appreciate you being here this morning, Judge.
Thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
It should prove to be, it's been quite a while since we've seen each other. Can we start at the beginning and give us some of your background? Personal background, yeah.
Born, let's skip to law school.
Okay.
Duke University, Dickinson School of Law, graduated very high in my class and was one of only two members of the class to be hired by large law firms in Philadelphia. So I started out in that environment.
Okay.
Coincidentally, it was in the Trust and Estates Department of White and Williams.
What do you
And
know?
I'm now back in probate, so I've gone full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't plan any of it, I can
No.
tell you that.
Well, and you've been in a lot of different roles ever since
Yeah.
then. Now, after practicing with a firm, how did you eventually get involved in?
Well, there was a program initiated by District Attorney Arlen Specter, hiring young associates from large law firms. And I got an invitation. For some reason, I thought I needed to experience the courtroom and to learn how to handle myself in that environment. And so I accepted, went to the DA's office, and I loved the experience.
Yeah.
You were on trial every day. My boss in those years was Jim Fitzgerald, who later became a common pleas court judge, superior, actually sat on the Supreme Court as well for a period. And he was terrific, a wonderful learning experience. People don't know this, but he was a wonderful trial lawyer. Had
No, I did not.
quite a run of successful results in juries. And it was a learning environment. And,
Well, he's a really nice guy.
he
too.
is, and a very rich and challenging environment. So I was there for a couple of years, and then I left, and I'll tell you about that. But I returned to the district attorney's office under Ron Castile, who, as you know, became Chief Justice, and I became his deputy of investigations,
Oh.
and it was an extraordinary period of time. We had the MOVE investigation, which was a sensational
Sure.
event in
Right.
Philadelphia. And we initiated the first undercover investigation of a sitting judge at the time, Judge Harris, and that resulted in an eventual successful prosecution.
Right.
And so, as deputy, I was in charge of economic crime, special investigations, the grand jury, and narcotics. And I guess, when I think about it, it was one of the most exciting periods in my career, the trial law, the litigation, and as a lawyer, the opportunity to persuade a jury. It was an extraordinary experience, and I missed it, actually, when I went back on the bench.
Oh.
However, in between, after leaving the DA's office under Arlen Specter, I was invited to be the first disciplinary counsel in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And I then, for the next 12 years, prosecuted lawyers,
Right.
which was an interesting experience, I might say. But most of my trial work was in quasi-criminal proceedings. I actually tried a case for 3 weeks in Clearfield County and traveled around the state.
Oh, yeah.
And most of my appellate work was before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court because they had original jurisdiction in disciplinary
Right.
matters.
Okay.
So I argued well over 30 cases to the
Wow.
Supreme Court. Yeah.
That's a long and varied career just from what you've told us already. Now, there's a heck of a lot more that comes with you.
Let's go to the judge period.
Okay.
Is that where you're going?
Yeah.
All right. I was in the district attorney's office under D.A. Castile and First Assistant Chadwick, and Governor Casey had just been elected. And he was a lawyer before he became governor. and he was very committed to merit selection. And so he convened a merit selection committee,
Okay.
and they took applications. For some reason, I threw an application at them, and then the next thing I knew, I was sitting in front of a panel of 15 people and being grilled and interrogated, and much to my surprise, they picked me.
Aside from your success there, did that idea, the panel, seem to work? I mean, I know it worked for you.
I thought it was a much more in-depth examination of credentials, if you will,
Right, okay.
than the electoral process, which we all know depends a lot on ballot position
Right.
and whether or not you have an identification with the party.
Mm.
I had none.
Okay.
So we were thrown into the political process and became good friends with my running colleagues. I'm sure you know LaGrome Davis,
Right.
Darnell Jones, and they both became members of the court and then have gone on to distinguished careers as federal jurors.
Yeah.
And the other two members of the KC5 were Mark Bernstein and Ed Summers, both of whom had some political assistance.
Mm-hmm.
The three of us, Judges Davis, Jones, and Herron, had none, and we ended up being foreclosed from invitations to the ward committee meetings. So I'd show up, and I remember Senator Hankins had a funeral home. They parked me with the caskets in there, and then when they finally remembered to come and get me, they apologized, but it was too late, and I had missed the opportunity to speak to the committee people. But it was a wonderful experience, and I remember even Bobby Avellino in his ward.
Yeah.
He parked me in upstairs, and then everybody was in the bar downstairs, and I was late for that party as well. So, but interestingly enough, this election that we were in followed the roofers union scandal, which was a terrible experience for this court. And 11 judges had been removed for ethics violations and taking envelopes from the roofers union, and 2 judges who were indicted, one found not guilty, one found guilty. But the newspapers were extraordinary in their support of merit selection, and the political parties were obviously very opposed. So we got through the primary and won, to our surprise. I didn't expect to win.
Right.
I had to quit my job in the DA's office and go to all these ward meetings that, again, that were not very open at that point. But I met some wonderful people along the way and
Right.
Received some help. And because of the newspapers, all the KC5 judges were elected in the primary. And then we ran in the general election in November, and we were being opposed by the Democratic slate of candidates because they had been cross-endorsed. We weren't.
Gotta be
And
tough.
so I expected to lose that one too, and much to my surprise, I won. So, but during the process, our names were submitted to the Senate for confirmation. And I think we're the only group of candidates ever defeated 5 times by the Senate. Who refused,
Oh, it was the whole group.
Right.
Yeah.
Refused to convert. Well, they confirmed Judges Bernstein and Summers,
Oh, with the political background.
but
yeah.
not
Pardon.
the 3 of us.
Mm.
And so we were finally confirmed after we won the November election, but
Isn't that nice?
the governor stayed with us the whole time.
Good.
The Senate refused to consider any of his agenda
Mm.
because of his commitment to merit selection. And so it was an exciting time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But from what you describe and how I have, what I've learned about the merit selection idea, it seems like a lot better and a cleaner way to determine, or at least start to determine who will be judges in any particular area involving no money and just generally, as you said, questions and qualifications that you have, not anything else.
I agree.
Yeah, so
I agree.
seems like a reasonable idea.
And hopefully we'll get to that process someday in the future.
Mm.
Obviously, looking at credentials and experience makes a lot more sense than just voting for
Right.
an anonymous person based on their ballot position or based upon party endorsement.
Right.
Right.
Now, when you first became a judge, or in this occasion, when you became a judge after the election, what kind of work did you do? Was it criminal work? Yeah.
Well, we have a protocol here.
Oh, here, yes.
We're wedded to this in the Court of Common Pleas. So it doesn't matter what your experience is. You start out in criminal if you're in the trial division. So I started out in criminal, and then I progressed into from felony waiver to majors. And I think my last year in majors, Jane Greenspan was a calendar judge, and she sent all the child sex abuse cases to me in my courtroom, and it was a very, very painful,
Oh, it's gotta be
difficult
difficult.
experience.
Yeah.
Right.
I was a juvenile probation officer at the time, and I had a lot of those kinds of cases.
Oh, they're incredibly difficult cases with anatomical dolls and young children involved
Witnesses and,
as
yeah.
witnesses. And anyway, that was a 6-year stint, and then I was transferred to civil and worked with judges who became very, very close friends of mine. So there's Justice Nigro, Judge Shepard, and I was on the Shepard Committee that was appointed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to look at addressing certain issues in the court with a reform agenda. And it was during that process that Judge Bernstein and I wrote about accountability, which was an interesting study.
Yes, and it was new
So
at the time.
I was working with Judge Bonavita Cole, Judge Shepard, Justice Nigro.
By the way, it's a
and Judge
great
Lee.
report that that committee put out. That you
I
were
thought we
involved
did a
in.
fine job,
Yeah.
but Shep really deserves credit. He wrote it with incorporating our different segments in the final report. So moving forward, Alex Bonavita Cola was the administrative judge for 2 terms, and he started the Judge Pro Tem program and addressing the civil backlog, and I was one of the 4 team leaders. We divided the backlog of cases into 4 segments, and then each of us as a team leader proceeded to go through that inventory, and we
Okay.
made incredible progress.
We chopped it in half, didn't you, the backlog?
We actually moved 29,000 cases down eventually to 11,000, and then
Okay.
under my stint as AJ, we got down to 6,500.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just handleable.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it still hovers around that number. Those are major jury, and there are, of course, other parts of the civil inventory.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then at some other point, you were named or appointed as an administrative judge for the trial
Yeah,
division. And that's-
it was kind of an interesting phone call. I got a phone call in the evening from Chief Justice Cappy, and he said that he and Justice Sapala were at the Four Seasons Hotel, and they'd like to see me right away. And so I lived in Center City.
Mhm.
I drove over, went up to their room, and they began talking to me, telling me that they thought well of me. I was surprised they knew of me, and that they wanted me to consider being the administrative judge. Well, you don't say no, for God's sakes. But they said the only thing we're going to tell you is we want you to make all your decisions in the best interest of the court. And I still remember those words.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a wonderful directive.
Yeah, and you held true to that?
I hope I did.
Yeah, well, that's, I mean, I think that's great goal.
I guess I'll mention that.
Go ahead.
So we had an odd period of time here. Judge Bonavita Cola was elected president judge in December
Right.
of 1995. and then didn't take office as president judge until later in January 1996. And so he remained AJ during January, and we experienced in our court something that the older ones around will remember as the Night of the Knives. So Alex shifted 3 judges to positions that they didn't like. And so when I became AJ in January of 1996, I got 3 knocks on the door from each one of these 3, and they said, you have to undo what Judge Bonavita-Cola did, because now you're AJ and you make all assignments in the trial division.
Right.
And I said, I'm not doing that. I mean, you'll have to live in your assignment for at least a year.
Yeah.
I'm not about to undo what was done, and I respect Judge Bonavita-Cola. I really thought he was a wonderful, wonderful administrator.
Yeah.
And extremely wise. So one of those 3, and this I'll mention this because it's probably a mistake I made, was Bernie Avellino. So Bernie, in leaving, stood close.
Yeah.
And he looked me right in the face.
Listen to me.
You may remember.
Yeah.
And he said, "You are toast." And so, we went on, and then, of course, he didn't perform his assignment, and Alex and I filed a petition to dock his pay.
Yeah.
His pay was docked, and he sued us. And I guess if I had it, and there were front page headlines of
Yeah.
judges at war with each other. I guess if I had to do over again, I'd try to think of a different way to resolve it. But we ended up in federal court. I think the federal judge misapplied Rooker-Feldman as a doctrine, and we ended up going beyond summary judgment. But reasonable minds can differ. In any event,
Yes.
at the end of it, a year or so into the litigation, he resigned and kept his pension, but it was resolved. Could I have done it a different way? Well, Alex and I tried our best, but
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to fight.
Well, exactly. And there's, really, if a judge with the authority assigns you as a judge to a job, then I think it's incumbent upon you to do that job.
Well, he had an interesting theory. His theory was that after you'd been on the bench for 10 years or so, you could pick any assignment you wanted. And of course, that was not the case then, and not the case now. Anyway, I went on as AJ for 2 terms. I'm proud of the accomplishments we made. Reorganized the probation department, moved them from 121 North Broad
Right.
to their present location, created a whole new environment there. I built the complex lit center on the
Litigation center,
6th
yeah.
floor. I built the courtroom 21 project, the courtroom 625, which we still
Right.
have today. And there were amazing changes taking place in the
high-tech courtroom,
on the high-tech
625.
side, and as well on the civil side, as we continued to make great progress in going through the day backward cases and then picking up the day forward cases. And I guess one of the achievements I think was valuable to the court was creating judicial teams. So we
Okay.
had weekly meetings, and my best friend in the court, Judge Shepard, assisted me in all of that. He was amazing. And I'd drop in every morning, and we'd talk, and around Christmas time, he'd have his train set out, and his toys, and there was always some activity going on in
Yeah.
Shepard's
Sure.
chambers.
I've experienced it.
He'd
Yeah.
bury the cigarette as you came in,
Yes.
and then, he'd pick up the phone as you're there, and so he was Shep, as you well know.
Yeah.
So, and I miss him.
Yeah, I do too.
He was a wonderful influence.
Great
So,
man.
my term ended in 2002, but just before it ended, I started the Commerce Court.
Mhm.
We are still the only Commerce Court dedicated to commercial cases in Pennsylvania.
Right.
I'm kind of surprised that other courts didn't create one as well.
But it's been lauded as a good innovation, and great innovation.
Shep and I took equal share of all the cases. I'm proud of the fact that I kept an assignment.
Yeah.
At all times I was administrative judge. I don't say that in, criticism of others who didn't. I did it for selfish reasons. I loved the courtroom and I
Yeah.
loved having the work. It was, and has always been central in my life. So the court's been quite wonderful to me, and I hope I've made a contribution to it.
You sure have. I want to get back to some other questions now. I knew we were going to take a lot of time on all your accomplishments and what you had to tell us, which is all very interesting.
Did I destroy your agenda?
No,
Okay,
not at
good.
all, because that background can move on to current ground and future ground if we wanted to.
Well, I want to be cooperative.
Well, you're being very cooperative. Steve, get the whip. But I have some of these questions that I'd like to get to, and I think one of them is, how would you advise judges who are just starting out?
Well, I think you want to go to the courtroom on time, create expectations for lawyers that you will be prompt. And I tried to start at 9. I very quickly learned you can't get anybody doing anything at 9. The police don't even show up until 9:30. So there's a learning curve here.
Yeah, sure.
And you have to accommodate the structure of these various offices that are involved in the litigation in the courts. I'd say you want to look, if you can, at the pleadings ahead of time. Know the facts of the case. I truly believe that trying cases on the civil side is not true on the criminal side. Trying cases on the civil side is a lost proposition for the parties, given the lawyer fees and the extended process involved. And if you can help the lawyers settle the case,
I see.
you're doing them and their clients the ultimate favor of trying to get parties to be reasonable and select a result rather than get a result that may be unpalatable as a result.
It's sort of like, how do you predict the future? Well, you make the future.
Right.
So,
And the other thing is that I think you can develop a certain level of arrogance as a judge. And you have to be wary of that, because actually you understand the process better than anyone else. You understand what's likely to happen, and you have the ultimate ruling authority. And it is really an awesome way, and you want to be true to your role as a judge, not to force people into a result, but to guide them to a result if you can. And at all times, I think you need to admit to yourself and to the lawyers that you may not know the law.
Okay.
And,
or all of it. Yeah.
Or all of it.
Yeah.
And so it's a constant learning experience. And we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the process to invite that briefs and help in
Sure.
understanding the law so that it's applied well.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable,
Yeah.
too. Was there anybody that you truly admired? Now, I imagine you might say Al Shepard. Was there any, or if that's who you want to tell me about? Anybody who was like your mentor, or somebody else who was like maybe you might have thought of as a giant of the law?
Well, I truly admired and revered Shep. He was an extraordinary judge, gifted intellectually, always faithful to the law, talked about it all the time, but had this huge personality that was just so much fun to be around. Judge Ponavita Kohler was a mentor and an extraordinary influence for me as well. I thought he was really a sensitive man to the court's needs and balanced in his application of his powers. And he had considerable powers as both AJ and then subsequently President Judge.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I got along well with both men, but especially Al Shepard. Is there something else that you want to talk to us about today? And that's a wide open question, I know. You want to tell us about anything that maybe some major, well, you've already gone over so many accomplishments. I don't know, do you have any more in that bag, or?
That's an open-ended question. Let me see. I think the interesting part of my career is that I enjoyed the collaborative experience with the administrative side of the court.
Mhm.
There are wonderful people, you included,
Thank you.
but many dedicated people to the process, and then the judges as well. I think that, when I started out, the Roofers Union and the removal of well over 13 judges
Yeah.
left a huge cloud on the court. And I'm distressed to see, even today, that
Yeah.
there are instances where judges are identified as having ethical lapses, if we
Oh.
can put it that way, or questionable rulings. And given the fact that there are only 93 of us, it only takes one,
Yeah.
only one, to destroy all the good work that the rest of us have dedicated our lives to.
Mhm.
And the regret I have is that we don't have the ability to avoid those calamities, and they'll always happen. I guess in an ironic sense, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the scandal.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Right.
But I hate to say that, the court needs to experience scandal in order to grow.
Yeah.
There ought to be another way to do that.
There should.
Yeah.
But you know what? You did.
I think we did well.
Yeah.
I think we did well. And
I agree.
And I think along the way, the bench has earned a reputation for integrity and character, and I'm very proud to have been part of it.
Yeah. Well, we're very proud to have had you work
Well,
with the
thank you.
court system.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.